Welcome to today's Explainer, everyone. Now, right out of the gate, we're going to do something a little different today. We are going to completely reframe how you actually look at studying. Because let's be real, if you're like most of us, you probably view learning new things as this incredibly stressful interrogation. It's this grueling, exhausting process where you're just trying to force data into your brain. But what if we completely flipped that script? What if learning was actually way more like a warm, inviting social gathering where you're just making new friends? Today, we're exploring a highly detailed, brilliantly simple framework that takes unfamiliar knowledge and transforms it from a scary, intimidating enemy into a comfortable, lifelong companion. It's going to be a lot of fun, so let's get into it. Okay, so here is our roadmap for the day. First, studying isn't forced memorization. Number 2, making friends with unfamiliar concepts. 3, dividing emotions and connecting. 4, visualization fitting the relationship. 5, reuniting with concepts daily. And finally, number 6, the compound effect of knowledge.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, studying isn't forced memorization. Let's just be completely honest for a second. Do you absolutely hate math? Or maybe it's physics, or history, or economics. Do you ever get that sinking feeling, like this deep, heavy sense of dread right in your stomach when you encounter a new, difficult concept in a textbook? It's so common. We usually treat these new concepts like they're the enemy, or like some sort of alien invader that we have to defeat. So what do? We try to force it into our brains through sheer brute force rote memorization. You know the drill. You sit there staring blankly at a page, repeating a definition over and over again in your head, totally devoid of any real context. And frankly, doing that just feels awful. It's draining. It is no wonder at all that we instinctively push back and procrastinate when the process itself feels so incredibly unnatural and isolating.
But I want you to consider this really profound paradigm shift. What if studying is actually exactly like your first day at a new school? Think about it. When you walk into a new cafeteria for the first time, you don't sit down and try to memorize the height, weight, and biological data of every single student in the room, right? That would be completely absurd. Instead, what do? You naturally rely on mutual friends for warm, easy introductions. You casually figure out who hangs out with who. Studying is exactly the same. It is not about forcing unfamiliar concepts into a dark, empty void in your brain. It is simply about welcoming a new friend into a community of concepts that you already know, you already understand, and you already feel comfortable with. And by doing that, you naturally and effortlessly expand the territory of your thinking. A really great way to visualize this is by looking at how we interact with our textbooks. You see, a textbook's table of contents is essentially the expert's map. It's this highly structured, macro-level overview, meticulously created by someone who already completely understands the entire universe of that subject. But here's the catch. You cannot just memorize their top-down map and expect it to actually stick in your memory. To truly learn, you have to combine that expert map with what we call the student's map. This is your map. It's a living, breathing, beautifully messy personal clue network made up of your own unique experiences, your distinct impressions, and your personal analogies. When the rigidly structured expert's map beautifully overlaps with your highly personal, familiar map, that is when true, stable, and lasting learning actually happens.
Moving right along to Section 2, making friends with unfamiliar concepts.
So let's take a bird's eye view of how making a concept friend actually works in practice. What you're looking at here is a remarkably smooth, logical flow. It goes from the very first tentative encounter you have with an idea all the way to deeply expanding your everyday worldview. And the most important thing to notice here, memorization is not step 1. Actually, scratch that. Memorization isn't even a step you actively try to do. Memorization is just the natural, inevitable byproduct at the very end of a healthy relationship. First, a real connection has to be formed. Then, that connection must be repeated and visited over time. And finally, that repeated relationship gracefully turns into a completely reliable, automatic habit of thought.
Let's look a little closer at how these first 3 natural steps actually function. When a new concept arrives, let's go ahead and call them a transfer student. The very first thing you do is take note of your first impression. You just ask yourself, what immediate image or feeling comes to mind when I hear this word? Next comes the friend's introduction. This is the crucial part where you ask, okay, what do I already know that might be friends with this new concept? You literally let your existing solid foundation of knowledge kindly introduce the newcomer. And finally, you move into networking. This is where you figure out exactly how this new concept relates to your broader mental community. Are they super similar to someone else you know? Are they exact opposites? Is there a cause and effect relationship going on? You are carefully, patiently, and naturally figuring out exactly where they best fit into your mental social circle.
Okay, let's dive into section 3, dividing emotions and connecting. Think for a second about how we traditionally study. We usually aggressively interrogate a subject. We demand, "What is your definition? Tell me right now." Now, if you did that to a real person at a party, they would immediately shut down and walk away. The exact same thing happens with your brain. But what if you purposefully shift from a high-stress concept interview to a relaxed, friendly concept chat? For example, imagine you're trying to learn about mitochondria in a biology class. Instead of just furiously memorizing the textbook definition, let your existing knowledge gossip about it. The cell says, "Oh, mitochondria? Yeah, they hang out inside me." ATP chimes in and says, "Oh, that's the factory where I'm produced." And energy says, "Honestly, without them, I literally can't get anything done." By letting these familiar, comfortable concepts chat casually about the new one, the newcomer instantly feels approachable and safe. So the underlying crucial point here is that by actively lowering the pressure, learning transforms into a comfortable, easy conversation. And listen, if you happen to feel fear or boredom while trying to learn something new, it is so deeply important to validate those negative emotions. They are not signs that you're stupid. They certainly aren't signs that you're failing. They are simply helpful dashboard indicator lights from your brain. If you feel boredom, it just means you haven't found a strong, interesting personal analogy yet. And if you feel fear, it just means you need a safer, gentler introduction from a concept you already feel highly confident about. That's it. And we can actually use a highly effective divide and conquer strategy to dismantle those giant, scary main villains in our lives, like math. When a student casually says, "Man, I just hate math," that is usually way too big and unfair of a judgment. What they often really mean is, "I had an incredibly frustrating and embarrassing experience with fractions when I was in the 3rd grade." But if we patiently break math down into much smaller, distinct subgroups, things like numbers, shapes, patterns, games, and logic, suddenly there's a friendly opening. You might realize, well, okay, I hate fractions, sure, but I actually really like geometry and shapes, and finding patterns honestly feels like a fun puzzle game. You find the friendly little pieces you actually enjoy, and you use those as your welcoming front door to the subject. This brings us to section 4, visualization fitting the relationship. Now, at first glance, a massive visual dictionary like this might seem a little bit overwhelming, but it holds an incredibly powerful realization. You should not just use a generic, messy mind map for absolutely everything. Concepts relate to each other in very different, highly specific ways. Because of that, you need tailored seating charts for different kinds of friends. If you try to force every single relationship into the exact same type of bubble diagram, you lose all the rich, meaningful nuance of how that information actually connects and interacts. To keep things really detailed but also highly actionable for you, here is a practical breakdown of 4 specific visual tools you can literally start using today. When the relationship is cause and effect, like say rising temperatures causing evaporation, use flow arrows. It shows direction. If you are comparing 2 similar but distinct friends, like a plant cell and an animal cell, use a table or a Venn diagram to clearly show the overlap and differences. If you are breaking down what something is fundamentally made of, rely on a tree diagram to show the hierarchy. And for historical events or sequential processes, use a timeline. The secret is that you purposefully match the visual tool perfectly to the specific nature of the friendship. The golden rule you really need to remember here is that your goal is not to create a beautiful piece of art for an art museum. A good visualization is a meaningful relationship map. It is not just a pretty phone book listing a bunch of isolated facts. You are designing a clear, instant visual cue that fundamentally shows exactly how these ideas hang out together in your brain. When you glance down at your notes a week later, the arrows, the trees, and the tables should instantly trigger the core clues and the warm, personal impressions you've already gathered.
Next up is section 5, reuniting with concepts daily. Moving this new friendship out of the sterile, fluorescent-lit school building is absolutely essential. This right here is the natural progression of truly integrating knowledge into the actual fabric of your life. Because think about it. If a concept only lives inside the pages of your textbook, it's just an acquaintance you leave at the classroom door. But when you start organically bumping into that concept out in the real world, in your daily life, that is when it transitions into a permanent, meaningful part of your worldview. Imagine the incredible power of this journey. You learn a dry, theoretical rule in school. It feels kind of boring. But then, a few days later, you are in the kitchen helping salt some cabbage for kimchi. You're watching the water slowly drain out of the leaves, and suddenly it clicks in your head, wait a minute, that's osmosis. The difference in concentration is actively causing this movement right in front of my eyes. Or maybe you are standing on the bus and it suddenly slams on the brakes. Your body physically leans heavily forward and you can't help but smile because you just intimately, physically experienced inertia. That unexpected, delightful reunion outside of school hours, that is where true, permanent learning truly happens. And by actively seeking out these concepts in your kitchen, on your morning commute, or even while just watching the evening news, you transform dry facts into powerful, personal lenses through which you understand your entire world. You start asking really profound worldview questions. You experience that inertia on the bus, and suddenly you wonder, do my bad habits have inertia too? Do they just want to keep moving in the exact same state unless a serious force acts upon them? Or you play on a seesaw with your kid and realize equilibrium isn't actually about being perfectly frozen in place, it's about constant, tiny, continuous adjustments. Suddenly, the whole world becomes a rich, vibrant playground for you and your concept friends.
Which brings us to our final part today, Section 6, the compound effect of knowledge. Your knowledge creates this incredible, infinite compound interest effect. When you study by making friends, one concept eagerly introduces you to 3 of its closest friends, and then those 3 proudly introduce you to 10 more. Because you aren't just memorizing isolated facts in a vacuum anymore, but rather building a vibrant, interconnected social network in your mind, your learning actually becomes exponentially faster over time. What used to be a grueling, agonizing chore becomes an infinitely fun, completely self-sustaining chain reaction of endless discovery.
I absolutely love this quote because it perfectly encapsulates everything we've talked about today. It completely removes all the heavy guilt, the frustration, and the shame that is so typically associated with not understanding a topic right away. It replaces all that negativity with the deep, reassuring comfort of knowing you just haven't been properly introduced yet. You aren't lacking intelligence. You aren't incapable. You simply need one of your existing, trusted knowledge friends to gracefully make the right connection for you.
And this brings us to a really empowering realization to wrap things up. You don't ever start with an empty brain. You are already incredibly smart. You possess a vast wealth of knowledge, you have varied life experiences, and deep connections just waiting to be utilized. The foundation is already there in your mind, it is robust, and it is ready. Which leaves us with just one exciting, provocative question to end our explainer today. Take a look at the beautiful, expansive universe of knowledge you have already built over your lifetime. Who will you enthusiastically invite into it next? Thank you so much for joining me today, and happy learning!